So in this section, we are going to talk about radical Reconstruction. This was a period of Reconstruction where the radical Republicans took control of Congress and passed laws that guaranteed African American equality in the South, that treated the South with more harsh demands in order for them to re-enter the South. So our essential question is, how did life improve for African Americans in the South during radical Reconstruction? So we remember that the 13th Amendment ended slavery in the United States. The 14th Amendment was ratified during Reconstruction, and it guarantees citizenship for all, including former slaves. The 14th Amendment was necessary because of the Dred Scott ruling in the 1850s, which had said that African Americans were not citizens. So in order for states to re-enter the Union, they also had to add the 14th Amendment to state constitutions. Andrew Johnson hated the 14th Amendment. He did not support it. As you remember, his attitudes towards African Americans was, that they did not deserve equal treatment, especially the right to vote, that they should be treated as second-class citizens, even if slavery was dismantled. However, the 14th Amendment is added to the Constitution. Congress also passes the Military Reconstruction Act of 1867, which divided the South into 5 military districts. Every state in the South, in the former Confederacy, was put under control of a Union general. Tennessee was excluded from the Military Reconstruction Act of 1867 because they had passed the 14th Amendment and had been reunited with the Union. So they are exempt from the Military Reconstruction Act, and the South is divided into 5 military districts. So within each of these districts, you can see down here who was in charge of those districts. So basically the South, well, not basically, the South is under military occupation by the Union, which is something that is incredibly upsetting to them. They wondered, what else do we have to do? We've already lost the war, slavery is over, like, what else does the Union want from us? And the answer was guarantees for African American equality, something that most Southerners could not accept. One of the main reasons for the military occupation of the South was for, protecting against the black codes that had been passed, protecting African Americans as they went to the polls to vote, as they often were like beaten or turned away or intimidated to stay home. So the Military Reconstruction Act was not popular in the South. Andrew Johnson is not a fan of it. He tries to veto it, but Congress once again overrides his presidential veto. Congress is getting super tired of Johnson. Why? Because he keeps vetoing all of their bills. He is refusing to go along with what the radical Republicans want out of Reconstruction. In fact, he is supporting the South and supporting just the opposite of them. So, in order to set up Andrew Johnson in a way to remove him from office, Congress passes the Tenure of Office Act. This limited the power of the president to hire and fire government officials. So the justification that radical Republicans gave for this was to keep Johnson from firing the radical Republicans that were still left in his cabinet. However, it was a blatant and obvious setup in order to bring the president under their control. Not long after the Tenure of Office Act is passed, Andrew Johnson fired Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, who was a radical Republican still left in his cabinet from the days of Lincoln. This obviously upsets Congress. The House of Representatives vote to impeach him with the justification that he violated the Tenure of Office Act. In impeachment proceedings, the House of Representatives have to bring up the vote, and then the Senate acts as the jury, the ones who decide yes or no. He missed getting kicked out of office by 1 vote. So he was impeached, but not removed from office. The first president to ever be impeached in United States history. After the impeachment trials, he causes no trouble for the remainder of his time in office. The radical Republicans succeeded in doing what they want, which was bringing Andrew Johnson under control. After his impeachment proceedings, Andrew Johnson is not in office for very much longer. In 1868, the United States holds an election in which they elect war hero Ulysses S. Grant, who was running as a Republican candidate. So obviously he had the support of many people in the Union as the war hero, but he also had a lot of support in the South. In 1868, the black vote was an important deciding factor in the elections. African Americans voted Republican because that was the party of Lincoln, the party of the great emancipator. And obviously the radical Republicans are the group within the government that are fighting for African American rights. So Ulysses S. Grant becomes president. Here's our electoral map. We can see that 3 states, Texas, Mississippi, and Virginia, are not participating in this election because they still have not re-entered the Union. We can see we've added a few new states, Kansas, Nebraska, Oregon over here. Those are new from the last map that we looked at. And this brings us to the last of our Reconstruction Amendments. The Reconstruction Amendments collectively are the 13th, which abolished slavery, the 14th, which guaranteed citizenship to African Americans, and the 15th, which says that you cannot deny the right to vote based on race. So it gave black men the right to vote in the United States. The 15th Amendment was controversial among the South. Many Southerners did not believe African Americans should have the right to vote, but it was also controversial among women who had been fighting for the right to vote for decades and who are specifically still being denied that right. It says nothing about gender. Women still are not allowed to vote. And many of the suffragists were like, why can't you just change the language to say that everyone can vote? And it's because most people in power, most men in power, still do not women to exercise that right. Unfortunately, we'll talk about in the next section barriers to the 15th Amendment, which were put in place to stop African Americans from voting, even after this right was enshrined within the Constitution with the 15th Amendment. So by 1870, all of the southern states have met the requirements to rejoin the Union. The United States is reunited again. So we have achieved that. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments have been added to the Constitution. Federal guarantees to African American equality have been added to state constitutions. The African American community is about to see a lot of success that is new to them. There's a lot of political change brought about by the fact that African Americans began voting at higher rates. They vote Republican, keeping that party in office. And they also begin to hold government jobs. positions of authority like sheriffs, police chiefs. Many were elected to state legislatures, as well as being voted into 16 seats in Congress. The first black senator in the United States was this man, Hiram Revels, from Mississippi. And in one of the great ironies in United States history, he took Jefferson Davis's old seat that he held before becoming president of the Confederacy. So, for several years within the Reconstruction period, we begin to see this change for African Americans, where they are being provided with guarantees for equality, being able to hold jobs that were never open to them before. However, it won't be long before we begin to see backlash from Southerners and barriers put in place to stop this progress.